All right, so got a few things I want to cover this morning for sunflower update for weed control. Most of this will be centered around kochia and water hemp, but we'll go ahead and just hop into things. So, first of all, question this time of year for me is always where is the weed guide at? And we do have the physical copies out in the landscape. So if you stop by your local county office or extension center, we should have plenty of physical copies on hand. If you prefer the electronic version, this QR code on the left side of the screen will bring you right to that. So a PDF version available online. I will have that QR code again in my final slide, so another chance towards the end if you so wish to scan it at that point in time. First thing I want to talk about, though, is an update on kochia. And so we've been tracking group 14 resistance within kochia over the past 4 years or so. So 2022 was the first year that we officially documented finding kochia resistant to group 14 herbicides. Since then, we have been having samples sent in to the National Ag Genotyping Center, and we can test for this just with a few leaves. So that has certainly helped us document where these populations are being found. So if your county is in green on the screen, we have confirmed group 14 resistant kochia. To be quite honest, a lot of these white counties, it is probably there as well. We just have not gotten the right sample to prove that we have the resistance within those counties. Lone exception may be the southeast corner of the state, where water hemp is just continuing to be our most predominant weed in that part of the state. One thing I do want to mention, so this is just documenting the presence or absence of group 14 resistance. We do have some additional testing we're doing this fall and winter. Was not able to get these in slide form this morning, but I was just looking at 60 different populations that we collected from across the state. We have an additional 40 we'll be spraying later on this afternoon. But out of the first 60 we tested, half of them were resistant to group 14 herbicides. So basically that's more of a random survey rather than this targeted survey where you send in suspicious plants to us to test. It's kind of random. We just find kochia in a field at the end of the year and test it. We were finding about half of them were group 14 resistant. So I wanted to highlight what I was looking at the greenhouse this morning. Now, as far as what group 14 resistance looks like, most folks listening will probably be quite familiar with it. But in the context of sunflower production, we have relied historically in no-till sunflower a lot on AIM in the form of Spartan Charge to get some burn down activity on kochia. And that is where we kind of started seeing resistance pop up. So just want to highlight there are all these other group 14 herbicides we can use ahead of other crops. But certainly when we talk about these populations, AIM is not going to be helping us in the burn down situation. What we are trying to get a little bit better handle on, which is really important for sunflower production, is how sulfentrazone or Spartan is working. So we have found some of these populations where when we compare them in the greenhouse to a susceptible population, we are not seeing as much control out of Spartan as we would like to see. Flumioxazin or Valor is another group 14 residual that we can use. Certainly have utilized that a lot in the fall. We cannot use that spring ahead of sunflower or after planting, but fall-wise, we have seen that slipping as well in recent years. So most of these slides, these pictures have been from Brian Jenks. You've probably seen them before, but this is one I really do like to focus on when talking about group 14 resistance. And we are trying to narrow in, why we're seeing variability within Spartan or sulfentrazone this winter with some of these collections that I just mentioned we were looking at this morning. But just kind of showing how the residual herbicides have been working. The different columns are different populations. So column 7 here is our susceptible check, so group 14 herbicides, still providing control, still getting complete control out of sulfentrazone, and we did have one escape from flumioxazin, but otherwise pretty good control out of that product. What we have been seeing when we find group 14 resistance, so we have that complete failure of some of our foliar applied burn down products, is we are seeing a lot less control, or in some cases next to no control, out of flumioxazin. So again, important because we utilize that product in the fall to try and get a good head start on kochia. So these populations, that's not going to be as viable. Sulfentrazone is where we are seeing variability. So some of these populations, like population 5 from the Mill Hall area, we're still seeing some pretty good control out of sulfentrazone. Population 6 here, is also from the mill hall area, and that one we are not seeing as good of control. So we're trying to figure out why this is, why there's this variability when we have pretty good consistency from foliar applied group 14 herbicides, but from the residual standpoint, we can see fluctuations across populations. So we're trying to figure out the why behind that, and hopefully by the time we're planting the spring, we'll have some better answers at least as to why that is. But just wanted to highlight again, when we talk about how much we rely on sulfentrazone and sunflower production, we are seeing it slip on some of these kochia populations. So the other thing that I'm going to probably be presenting some slides on here in a minute is fall-applied herbicides. So certainly wanted to show in the context of Zidua or pyroxasulfone how that's been working on these group 14 resistant populations. And the answer is about the same as other populations because it's a group 15 herbicide. So we are looking more at Zidua or pyroxasulfone applications in the fall for kochia and for a few other things to try and utilize that winter moisture to get better control of some of these early emerging weeds within the spring. But just wanted to highlight here's two resistant populations in the middle, showing again that flumioxazin was not controlling these populations from a residual standpoint. Pyroxasulfone, we're getting some control, but when we do a tank mix, something like Fierce, which is the tank mix of Valor and Zidua, we are seeing much better control. So even though flumioxazin was not providing much control by itself on these populations, it is helping out pyroxasulfone or Zidua when we have it in that tank mix. So something we might be looking at more in the future of doing some of these tank mixes in the fall to try and get us a better head start on some of our weeds, kochia being a primary one. So I'm going to share a few slides here. Next couple of slides are all provided from Dr. Brian Jenks. It's going to be sharing data between his research in Minot and then Caleb Dolly down in Hettinger. A lot of this will be focused on pyroxasulfone in the fall. So Zidua is the standalone that many of us know. Anthem Flex is another option out there. It's a tank mixture or pre-mixture with AIM. So from a residual standpoint, this is how we're getting pyroxasulfone since AIM does not provide much residual. And within the next year or so, we will be seeing a lot more generics into the marketplace of pyroxasulfone. So that will kind of bring the cost down of these main brand products as well as however many generics end up on the marketplace as well. But just highlighting that we'll be talking much more about this chemistry as we have in the past couple of years, but we're continuing to focus in the future. So some overall impressions. Again, these are some impressions from Brian Jenks. When we apply pyroxasulfone in the fall, where we've seen some suppression to at times good control, and good for us, we're not using the word excellent, so you're still going to have some weeds to deal with in the spring, but we can certainly thin out the herd of kochia, wild oat, and some of our brome species. So these are some of the ones where we're seeing some pretty decent results on with fall-applied pyroxasulfone, again, giving us that head start in the spring. And as far as other weeds that we have some data of just suppression, so maybe more of like the 30-40% control level would be the ones there on the right side of the screen. So the past couple of years, Brian's been putting out pyroxasulfone in the form of Anthem Flex at a few different rates in the fall. So what are you seeing with kochia control? Both of these were applied middle of October in 2023 and 2024 with evaluations mid to late June. So what's our kochia control look like basically in the middle to end of June from this fall applied Anthem Flex? The 3-ounce rate, which most people might be focusing on from a cost perspective, about 50 to 60% control. So certainly still going to have to contend with these kochia plants, but giving us a pretty good head start. And actually 50 to 60% into June is quite good in my opinion. But then getting to these higher rates, if we look at 6 ounces, that's where we can get to this 85 to 90% control of kochia into June. And again, that's kind of the past couple of years, the results we've been seeing. The far right side of the screen here, just want to highlight, we are looking at different combinations of the lower rate of pyroxasulfone with some metribuzin. We can't do this ahead of sunflower, though, because metribuzin is an 18-month rotation to sunflower, but some other crops where we could use metribuzin, showing that we can kind of get to this 90% control level with the tank mixture of a more economic combination of those rates. So kind of similar situation. down in Hettinger. So this was applied just this past year. So applied in September is the blue bar of 2024. Orange is applied late October of 2024, and the evaluations were made 20 days after planting dry pea in the spring of 2025. But again, showing with Zidua here, so this is the standalone product, not Anthem Flex. We do 3 ounces of Zidua, about 80 to 85% control, whether it's applied late September or late October, and then higher control as we got to the higher rates. So again, showing what we can see into the season, field pea in this situation, but certainly same time frame as other spring crops like sunflower. And then green foxtail is the other thing we should probably focus a little bit more on, particularly with sunflower, since we have resistance to our Group 1 and Group 2 herbicides. We've traditionally used post-emergence to control green foxtail. So a couple of data slides here from Brian, showing here's just again that fall applied Anthem Flex. So we're back to the 3 to 6 ounces of the Anthem Flex in the fall. Just changed it to green foxtail this time, and getting it at that 3 ounce rate between 40 and 60% control, and then anywhere from 70 to close to 90% control with that higher 6 ounce rate. So again, pretty important in context. So we do have to rely a lot more on our residual herbicides now for green foxtail control within crops like sunflower, since we have populations where we lost the ability to control post-emergence within this crop. So that was fall applied pyroxasulfone. The other thing that's important to talk about is spring applied Group 15 herbicides. So with green foxtail control, this was a trial that Brian had in 2024. This was comparing all the Group 15 herbicides we can use across crops. So do want to point out that we cannot use Outlook or Warrant within sunflower. When we focus on Zidua or Dual, kind of at our standard rates we would like to target, we were seeing blue bar 7 weeks after planting. I did lose my legend here, but 9 weeks after planting is the orange bar. But Zidua, we were seeing about 60 to 80% control, depending on how late we rated out of Zidua at 3 1/4 ounces, spring applied again, and then Dual, a little bit higher control of green foxtail in this particular year. Now I'll show some data slides later about the influence of rainfall on a product like pyroxasulfone or Zidua, but just wanted to show the differences that Brian was seeing in green foxtail control. So I do want to shift gears now and talk about water hemp. Should maybe summarize a few more key notes on kochia is the fact that we are seeing this variability with sulfentrazone is going to make that more difficult to control from a spring residual standpoint in the future. So we do have some research trials out now that we'll be able to present next year, looking at splitting fall and spring applied applications of things like Zidua or pyroxasulfone, sulfentrazone, and looking more heavily at our Group 3 herbicides once again for some kochia control. So we'll have some more data on that in future years, but just kind of highlighting the fact that we're having to get more creative with our fall and spring applied programs if we want complete season-long control of kochia and sunflower, because we just don't have those post-emergence options for that weed. But shifting gears to water hemp, so this is a weed that is continuing to spread. We have found more populations in the north central, getting into the western part of the state this past year. Certainly for those of us in the eastern third half of the state, many of us deal with water hemp on a daily basis. It will be our number one weed. But for those who are just getting into the water hemp game, it is an extra challenge and kind of makes us rethink how we put some herbicide programs together. But one of the things I just want to talk about with water hemp biology, you'll hear us talk about the term 1 million seed per plant. And it really does take a plant that's as tall as a truck or taller than a truck and wider than a truck to get to that 1 million seed per plant. We don't often see water hemp get this big. This usually takes a drowned out area with no other competition. But this plant is certainly capable of that in some of these drowned out areas. I do like to focus on the other side just to show how prolific water hemp can be in the seed production area. So here's a 3-inch tall plant we pulled out of some small grain stubble a couple years ago. So we removed our wheat crop in the early part of August. We got some rainfall mid-August. Water hemp germinated in this field. In early part of September, we went in and pulled out the water hemp that we found. Ended up being about 3 inches tall, threshed out and counted as much seed as we could. So all these little black and white and brown dots here on the screen are the seed we were threshing out. And I counted 88 seed. So let's just go ahead and round up to 100 since that's more fingers and toes than I have. So a 3-inch tall water hemp plant within 3 weeks after germinating packed on about 100 mature seed. And the reason I like to point this out is because when we see plants that small late in the year in small grain stubble, it's not just one plant. It's going to be several 100,000 to maybe even millions per acre in some of these dense infestations. So it really is just a numbers game with water hemp. One of the reasons why you might only have a few escape plants 1 year, and then 2 years later you basically can have a field-wide infestation because this is one of our weeds that can just produce a tremendous amount of seed. And just one further example just to show how much seed it can produce. So this was a video I took during soybean harvest a few years ago, taking a mature water hemp plant that was about waist high at the time. These are the type of plants that can have 100,000 or so seed on it. I just clipped the top about 12 inches off this plant, removed about a 2-inch tall or 2-inch long segment, and here I'll be threshing it out, and you can see all the black and brown seed falling off that little 2-inch seed head segment. So just another visualization showing how much seed is going to be in one 2-inch segment, and then if you can count all the number of 2-inch segments on that mature plant, and just kind of again a visual there showing how much seed water hemp can produce. So that's just a quick message there on biology and seed production within water hemp. As far as where we have found it, if your county is green, we have at least confirmed one population of water hemp in the area. We certainly could be able to find it anywhere in the western part of the state, though, because I do know there's a couple populations over here in Montana, and then south of us, water hemp is pretty widespread in South Dakota as well. So certainly want everyone to be on high alert for this weed because of many of the issues it's causing us in the east. And amongst all crops, not just sunflower, but the fact that we are continuing to add more herbicide resistance onto water hemp. And in fact, some of my colleagues in Illinois just the past week or so did come out and confirm they have glufosinate or Liberty-resistant water hemp now in some areas of the nation. So if it's a herbicide, water hemp can evolve resistance. And with a crop like sunflower, we don't have as many options. That's why we like to have or raise concern about this weed. But I do like to give a little bit of historical context. So the year 2000 was the last year we had a statewide survey of just weed escapes within fields. So about 26 years ago now. But highlighting at that point in time, we found water hemp in 5 counties. So 3 counties in the valley, one near Devil's Lake, and then up in Rolette County, we found some water hemp plants in the late part of the summer. But putting it in context, this was about 0.3 to 0.2% of all fields surveyed where we found water hemp. Contrasting that, about a quarter of the fields we found the other pigweed species, redroot pigweed, pale amaranth, smooth pigweed. It would be nice to go back and to conduct a similar survey now because I know these numbers with water hemp will be much higher, and there will be counties where that's the only pigweed that we find. Certainly in the southern part of the valley, we just have a lot of water hemp that we're contending with these days. And it is unfortunately becoming a sunflower problem now too. So this past fall, certainly in the southern part of the valley, saw way too many fields like this. So basically once the sunflower heads start nodding down, water hemp was continued to grow vertically, and then we can kind of see the escapes that we can have of water hemp within a sunflower crop. And part of this reason is because, similar to kochia, we don't have post-emergence options to clean up the water hemp. So we basically have our residual herbicide programs to catch water hemp. And if we have, in this case, this year, some of these areas, too much rain throughout the year, we run out of that residual herbicide at some point, and water hemp can germinate late into the year as long as there is sunlight available. So we really have the residual herbicides to work with, and Mother Nature can really kind of dictate how well those work for us on some years. Other thing to highlight with water hemp is we do have group 14 resistance within the water hemp as well. So the gold counties here are the confirmations of group 14 resistance. I would say basically the eastern third of the state, these white counties, we would probably fill them in if we got the right population. So we do have group 14 resistant water hemp out there. Why this is important for sunflower production is with group 14 resistant water hemp, we do see reduced levels of control with sulfentrazone or with Spartan. So if we're used to seeing about, we'll say, 6 weeks of residual control out of sulfentrazone on water hemp, if we have group 14 resistant water hemp, it may be more like 3 weeks of residual control. So I just want to highlight there that when we do have these populations, we still get some level of control from sulfentrazone. It will just be less, which then means we're having a heavy reliance on our group 15 herbicides, Zidua and Dual in the case of sunflower, to really help us clean up these populations. And I should, of course, mention the group 3 herbicides as well can be quite active on water hemp. So I do want to show some residual data slides here. I'm going to highlight the fact that this was some dry bean research. So some of these combinations are not labeled in sunflower, and I have put an asterisk next to the either the herbicide rates or herbicides that were off-label for sunflower. So FTAM, we did go up to 4 pints incorporated, so we would top out at 3.5 pints on sunflower. So the rate is what makes that off-label. Then our other group 3 herbicides, Sonlan, Treflan, Prowl, and then combinations of FTAM and either Sonlan or Treflan, and some of our Spartan or sulfentrazone-based combinations. These were all incorporated prior to planting at the rates on the screen. Same trial, we also had residual herbicides applied after planting. So we did go up to 2 pints of dual magnum. Outlook we can't use in sunflower, but certainly looking at that same rate of Spartan charge. And then Spartan Elite, which I should say is no longer a product on the marketplace, but Broadax is the same mixture. So we can certainly use Broadax in sunflower. But again, that same rate we applied incorporated, we wanted to look at that from a residual standpoint. Then going out 8 weeks after planting. So certainly asking a lot out of these herbicides, but within the case of sunflower, we don't have those post-emergence options to clean up any escapes. So what did we see 8 weeks after planting? This gold bar separates the incorporated herbicides on the left from the over-the-top pre-emergence herbicides on the right. And I will point out that in general, FTAM and our group 3 herbicides were providing the highest levels of control, about 90% control for many of them 8 weeks after planting. Where we got into Spartan Charge or sulfentrazone by itself, essentially, from a residual standpoint, about 70% control. Then that Spartan Elite or Broadax combination was giving us about 90% control. Best combinations were FTAM and a group 3. On the right side of the screen, from a residual standpoint, we overall saw less control from a residual standpoint compared to the incorporated herbicides. These were conducted in dry years, so that certainly does help the incorporated herbicides look a little bit sharper. But if I want to compare on these dry years, that Spartan Elite or Broadax, from a residual standpoint, over the top, again, not incorporated, just relying on rainfall, about 80% control compared to about 90% control when it was incorporated. So showing the benefit we can get in a dry year of incorporation of a product like that. Same thing with sulfentrazone by itself, about 50% control when we relied on rainfall versus 70 when we mechanically incorporated. So last little bit of results I wanted to focus on. I'll be showing a soybean study, but I'll be pointing out the sunflower labeled treatments within this. But I want to highlight how our residual products can work in a dry and in a wet year. So we had this large residual herbicide study conducted in 2 years. And 2023 was a pretty dry year for us, at least within the first 4 weeks after planting. So it took us within the first 2 weeks of planting. Sorry, there's an emergency alert, so hopefully I was the only one that got that. All right. Within the first 2 weeks of planting, we did not get a half-inch of rainfall, which is important because we talk about half-inch of rain being that magic number we would like to see to get our residual herbicides into the soil and working for us. And in fact, it took us 4 weeks and 10 different light rainfall events to get to our first inch of rainfall within this year. 2024, by contrast, was very wet after planting. 2 days after planting, we got our first inch of rainfall, and then we got 6 inches within the first 3 weeks. So just contrasting here a dry versus a wet year for a residual herbicide standpoint. Now, again, I mentioned this is primarily a soybean study, but I just want to highlight We did look at sulfentrazone at 4 fluid ounces, so kind of a standard rate that a lot of us may be focusing on using. And then I'll show where we had Zidua by itself at 3.5 ounces. Again, most of these are more soybean focused. But just want to highlight, in soybean, we can do these combinations with metribuzin and other things to get about 90% control of water hemp, just relying on those products. This is that dry year 2023, and I do want to point out, pyroxasulfone or Zidua by itself at 3.25 ounces, only about 15% control. Spartan, about 35% control at 4 fluid ounces. So these two herbicides were not providing a whole lot of control for us in 2023, where we didn't get all that much rainfall. That very wet conditions in 2024, now pyroxasulfone by itself was one amongst the best treatments, even with some of these more stout combination products. So this is a product that when we get continued rainfall, and a lot of rainfall can provide very good water hemp control for us. Spartan, just by contrast, at 4 fluid ounces was about 60% control. So some of my takeaways here, again, just kind of showing those different combinations. I would like to max out the rate of sulfentrazone we can use for water hemp because it will give us better control at higher rates, but just kind of showing the results we were getting at 4 fluid ounces. And ideally, if this was a sunflower-based trial, we would definitely have these in combination, looking at the Authority Supreme type products, and would receive better control once we get into those tank mixes. But just kind of showing some of the inherent risk when we rely on one single active ingredient for water hemp control, that in a dry year, something like pyroxasulfone may not work too well for us. But if we get adequate rainfall, it's going to be among the best products that we do have. So that's kind of good news from the residual standpoint for water hemp control in sunflower. And then just want to kind of focus on the different Group 15 herbicides. Again, the outlook and warrant off labels to the left side of the screen here is Zidua and Dual. This was that same wet conditions that I just talked about in 2024 for the prior slide. And this particular trial, we were getting about 93% control out of Zidua 6 weeks after planting. And Dual was about 65% control. Now, in a drier year, maybe Dual will be a little bit better than Zidua, but just kind of showing how these two can look on water hemp and under those wet conditions if we rely on the Group 15 herbicide by themselves. So that's what I had prepared for this morning. Just do want to highlight, if you do like listening to podcasts, we've got one War Against Weeds, and I'm pretty sure we have a sunflower episode on there, but we certainly have plenty of episodes talking about kochia, foxtail, and water hemp control along the way. Otherwise, I did say I will end with the QR code for the weed guide again. So just some contact information there on the screen, and then that QR code bringing you to the weed guide in the bottom right corner.